From the moment that letter landed in my mailbox, I knew something wasn't right. And that's when everything in my quiet neighborhood suddenly turned into a battlefield of rules and pride. The HOA Board claimed I violated regulations I had never even heard of, and they slapped me with a fine that felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there holding the notice in my hands, confused, angry, and honestly a little scared, because I knew I had done nothing wrong at all. That day, I made a promise to myself. If they wanted a fight based on unfairness, then I was ready to stand my ground the right way. It all started when I painted my front door a slightly darker shade of brown, something simple, something harmless, something that still matched every home on the street. I didn't change the structure, didn't break any rules, and I even checked the community guidelines before doing anything, just to be sure I was in the clear. But a week later, the HOA sent me a warning, claiming my home's appearance disrupted neighborhood harmony. Words that sounded dramatic, confusing, and honestly ridiculous. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was a misunderstanding, never realizing it was just the beginning of something much bigger. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, this time not a warning, but a fine, a large one, with threats of additional penalties if I didn't pay immediately. My heart started racing as I read the bold words, accusing me of violations that didn't even exist in the rulebook I had already reviewed. I felt frustrated, powerless, and deeply disrespected because it felt like they weren't enforcing rules, they were trying to intimidate me into submission. Instead of reacting in anger, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to gather proof, stay calm, and handle this the smart way. I began collecting photos of my house from every angle, screenshots of the community rules, and even examples of other homes painted with similar shades. I talked to neighbors who supported me, and many of them shared their own stories of unfair notices and unexplained fines from the same HOA board. It became clear that this wasn't just about me. This was a pattern of control, and people were too tired or scared to push back against it. That realization fueled something inside me, not anger, but determination to finally hold them accountable in a fair and respectful way. I wrote a detailed response letter, polite yet firm, explaining my compliance with every guideline and attaching every piece of evidence I had gathered. I requested a formal meeting with the board, not to argue, but to calmly discuss the situation face to face and seek a reasonable resolution. Days passed without a reply, and instead of agreeing to meet, they increased the fine and threatened legal action, which felt completely unreasonable and unjust. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was an abuse of authority, and I wasn't going to back down. So I reached out to a community legal advisor who specialized in housing regulations, someone who knew the law better than any intimidating letter could pretend to. After reviewing my case, they confirmed exactly what I suspected. The HOA had no valid grounds for their claims, and their actions violated their own bylaws. Hearing the truth was empowering, like someone finally turned on a light in a dark room filled with confusion and fear. With guidance and confidence, I prepared a formal dispute notice and officially challenged the fine through the proper legal process. The advisor reminded the board that leadership is responsibility, not control, and that fairness is the foundation of any community that hopes to thrive. The board shifted uncomfortably as they realized their decisions weren't just authoritarian. They were unsupported, unreasonable, and contrary to the values they were meant to protect. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of justice finally leaning in the right direction, something I had been fighting so hard to reveal. In that moment, I realized that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean conflict. Sometimes it simply means refusing to accept what isn't right. After deliberation, the board had no choice but to cancel the fine completely and issue a written apology for the stress and inconvenience they had caused. Hearing those words felt like a wave of relief washing over months of frustration, doubt, and emotional exhaustion that I had carried silently. I walked out of that room not just as someone who won, but as someone who proved that respect and fairness matter more than intimidation and power. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't hostility, it was justice, earned through patience, truth, and unwavering determination. But the story didn't end there, because that experience inspired several neighbors to come forward and question their own unfair notices and unexplained penalties. Together, we encouraged transparency, updated guidelines, and a friendlier system built on communication instead of threats and fear. The HOA began restructuring its policies, introducing clearer language, open discussions, and accountability measures that supported homeowners instead of working against them. What once felt like a battleground slowly transformed into a community again, one where voices were heard and fairness became the new standard. Looking back, I realized that the real war wasn't about fighting people, it was about standing up for truth, respect, and dignity in a peaceful and lawful way. It taught me that staying calm, gathering facts, and choosing the right path is far more powerful than reacting with anger or aggression. Sometimes, the strongest move you can make is simply refusing to be intimidated, while still treating others with maturity and respect. And in the end, that experience didn't just change a rule, it changed the way our entire neighborhood understood fairness and community. So if you ever find yourself facing unfair pressure, remember this story, take a breath, stay strong, and trust the power of truth and patience. You don't need to shout to be heard, and you don't need conflict to win. You just need courage, clarity, and the willingness to stand up for what is right. Because when you fight the right way, you don't just protect yourself. You inspire others to do the same, and that's how real change begins. And that's how I turned an unfair fine into a victory for fairness, community, and justice, one calm step at a time.